Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Between Three Studs. I'm Alex Stud.
I'm Hannah Stud.
And I'm Ron Stud.
And welcome to tonight's episode 20. Wait. Back up. Did I say Between Three Studs?
You did.
Wait, who was that other person talking?
I think that's your wife.
Hannah, is that you?
It's me.
It's Hannah!
How did you get on this episode?
I was lucky enough to be invited.
Well, Ron and I, as we are excited for episode 20, the big 20, we thought who better to be on this episode than the mastermind behind this show. The person who does all of our creative work. That's you.
I'm honored to be here.
We're happy to have you, especially like episode 20. It's crazy, like to think back to the first day you put together the original like logo for Between Two Studs. You've been along the whole way.
Yeah, when Alex told me you guys were interested in doing a podcast, no offense, but I definitely didn't think you'd make it this far.
How many episodes were you thinking? Like 3 or 4, and then it'd peter out?
Something like that.
Yeah. Here we are. We just discussed off air that season 1 will culminate with 26 episodes. So we're really trucking along here.
Yeah.
So Hannah, you know the show. I know you listen to every single episode. So why don't we get started with the first part of the show called the Ember Round? And the first question, you already said it. We all know it. But go ahead and tell us, how do you know us?
Well, Alex is my husband. I am very happy to be part of their family.
And you became a stud less than a year ago.
True. But it's kind of felt like I've been in your family for a while.
For sure.
Definitely. I think the first time that you feel comfortable taking somebody to the family reunion, you're practically part of the family at that point, because our family reunions, Hannah, you can probably attest to this. They're not for the faint of heart.
There's a lot of you.
Way too many.
It's terrible because I know some family members listen to this, but I don't always know when I recognize everyone as part of the greater family. Our mom's one of 11, but there are people who I say, I have no idea how they're related to us. And I've known them my whole life. And at this point, I can't ask. Like, we're just going to ride this ship out.
When I was first meeting everybody, if Alex didn't know their name, I would just introduce myself first, and then he would listen. And so I would get their name, and he would use me to then remember their name.
I thought that's why you get a significant other. So you can use a significant other to get the inside scoop on things.
Pretty sure that's how that works. So Hannah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am currently a second-year PhD student. We currently live in Chicago, but I was born in Minnesota, and I lived there till I was about 13. And then my family moved to Pittsburgh. And after college, I then moved to Boston, which is where Alex and I met. And then we moved to Austin, and now we're in Chicago.
All right, Hannah. So you've listened to the show a good number of times, and I know that you know what's next. What are you currently drinking?
So, very special occasion. So Alex and I are celebrating with a very special drink. We have a spiked Loganberry Slushie.
Ooh.
And for those who don't know, Loganberry is a very popular berry from Western New York, where it's a hybrid between blackberry and raspberry. And it has a very unique flavor to it. And I think the story goes that like back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were trying to figure out a berry that would be able to hold up to the harsh winters in the tough springs of Western New York. And so by crossing the blackberry and the raspberry together, you have this wonderful concoction as a Loganberry. And Hannah and I both are sipping on that with some vodka. Tito's vodka, which, Ron, if you don't know, Tito's is made in
Austin.
Exactly. So we're tying two of our cities together. Hook 'em.
Sweet.
What are you drinking, Ron?
I'm drinking something from Atlanta. I'm drinking Sweetwater 420 strain Mango Kush Wheat Ale, just because why not?
Sounds good.
I mean, I feel like I should have some Malort down here, but you know, we'll get that next time. So
for sure.
Now, Hannah, are you a huge fan of Malort?
No, I am not. Thank you for asking. I'm not Okay, I'll let you know a little secret. I'm not sure I've actually ever tasted it, but the smell, too strong.
It's
Not,
enough.
yeah, that's enough. Not gonna try it.
You know, I'll wear her down. It always happens. I got her to become a Bills fan. I got her to like me somehow. I'll get her to like my Lord. It's inevitable.
No doubt about it. All right, Hannah. So our next question. This is
a question, Ron. I know it's been keeping Hannah up.
I'm sure. Well, it's tough because shoot, every single episode we get somebody who just pulls something amazing out. And art is one of those really cool things where I don't know, you could take something that seems so overly mass produced that just seems kind of almost lame, but with given the right story, given the right context, you can certainly see how something is like, wow, I'm never going to look at a pack of gum the same way as I did before.
Wait, so Ron, do you think the answer is less relevant than the explanation? Like, do you think this is more of a storyteller question? Like, how good of a storyteller are you?
I think it's a little bit of that. I think that there's also a little bit of there's deeper wrinkles into who somebody is, I think, based on their answer. Like, we give all of our guests a little bit of time to think about it beforehand, right? And yeah, it's like, how do you find, in terms of the total works of humanity with art, how do you find something that speaks to you?
All right, so with that preamble,
yeah, no
pressure, but go ahead.
Pressure.
We're going to judge you on this question. So what piece of art represents or speaks to you in some way?
So before I give my answer, I am right now daring the two of you to answer this question at some point. I double dog dare you. You guys have to answer this at some point. And then two, before I say my answer, I want you to know I took a class a couple quarters ago about conducting ethnographies with artists. And ever since that class, I'm convinced that absolutely everything and anything can be considered art. So with that in mind, my answer, the piece of art that best represents me is the Boston Marathon. I'm not a runner, never have been, never will be, but when I ran it, I learned that I can accomplish anything if I put the time and the effort into it. And I also loved the culture and the tradition that surrounds the Boston Marathon.
Well, it is funny because if you're familiar with the Boston Marathon, anyone in the New England area, they call it Marathon Monday, right? If you work downtown, they give you the day off. And it's just an excuse to go drink and hang out and cheer on the people running the marathon. And I remember Hannah and I were living in Boston. We were dating, and we were watching and drinking as people are running and finishing the race. This is what everyone does in the city. And I remember Hannah saying, next year I think I'm going to run the marathon. And I kind of laughed because it's like, yeah, we're drinking. It's an inspirational thing, whatever. And sure enough, the next day, she started running. And Hannah, I don't think, I'm not trying to call you out, I don't think you ran a mile the first time.
No, in fact, the next day I had to go buy tennis shoes. I didn't even own tennis shoes. I couldn't run a mile. It took me, a long time to just get up to that. And I trained for a full year. And I did it. I was slow, but I finished it.
So you're saying if you put the work and time into it, you can do anything. That's what the Boston Marathon means to you.
That was my takeaway from it, yes.
Very cool. Because I think that ties into last week's episode. We had Cortland talk about the hero's journey, or in your case, the heroine's journey, where you saw the challenge ahead of you. You embraced it. You made it yours. And I'm sure it's changed you. I've heard so many stories about people who did marathons who it changed them as a person.
And to your first point, I think it's only fair that Ron and I, on our season finale, which we already talked about, episode 26, we will answer that question of what piece of art represents us. Because I know I have not wanted to answer that question, but now you called us out. It's on record. Ron and I have 6 episodes to get an answer.
We'll start working on it.
Hannah, guess what? Congratulations. You passed the Ember round.
Woo!
You've done it. You didn't even have to train as long.
That's what you think, Ron. Let's jump into some fun questions, a little bit about your career and your interests. You mentioned this earlier that you moved to Boston after college. And that's where I met you, right? You were working for the Children's Hospital in Boston. Side note, #1 children's hospital on the planet.
#1.
Everyone in Philly listening, don't worry, CHOP's #2. But #1, for the record, is and always is Boston. So while you were working there, I know that's where you got your interest in health informatics because you studied psychology in college. So tell us exactly what you did for the hospital and explain what health informatics is.
So health informatics, it's basically computer science and computing for healthcare. So it includes artificial intelligence, it includes telehealth, database management. But when I was there, I worked in clinical research informatics, which is using data in health informatics to make clinical research more effective. So that was really what catapulted me into my current research and my current interest in user experience. So health informatics is a lot about the data, it's about the back end. And when I was working there, I realized that a lot of the data is messy. And it was messy because the front end wasn't designed properly. And so that's when I started to become interested in the front end of things and the user experience with using these systems. So I don't know if user experience is technically considered part of health informatics, but in my research, they're very intertwined.
Well, it's funny because I had zero interest in healthcare when I met you, but I remember you telling me about projects that you were working on, and I found them so interesting. I remember one that you were working on where you were using data to find out if the weather has an impact on the ER. Do you remember that?
If I remember correctly, we found that on days that it was raining, there were a lot of no-shows and fewer visits to the ER. And so this meant that, I don't know if they actually enacted this, but it meant that they could have fewer parking attendants on days when it was raining.
Yeah, and that's clearly information that a hospital or healthcare system could leverage as they're anticipating the staff numbers. But it is interesting because clearly people aren't treating the ER the way it was intended to be treated, right? The weather shouldn't impact that. I think that's really interesting.
All right. So after 3 years at the Children's Hospital, you decided to further your education and enroll at UT Austin. What was that decision like?
Being the very analytical person that I am, Alex and I talked about it. We were very early on in our dating, but I wanted to go somewhere new. I wanted to experience something different. And so I talked to him and he was open to the idea of moving. And he said, okay, why don't you put together a list of potential options? And so I did. I created
a potential list of options. I think she sent me a spreadsheet with like 125 universities.
Wow.
A whole bunch of possible places that had good programs for me. And Alex and I went through that list and we, eliminated cities that we wouldn't want to live in.
But this list was not just about the academics of the school. It was like average weather, right? If there were any natural disasters, if there was a Buffalo Bills bar in the region.
Ooh.
There were some really, really good questions on there, and we both had veto power. And I vetoed the entire state of Florida, and I believe the entire state of California.
You did.
Yeah.
So knowing the bit about Hannah and her informatics background, that totally makes a lot of sense. I love it.
And I would, filter through this spreadsheet. We had some, V lookups going there.
Ooh, there you go.
We were definitely systematic, but it came down to Austin, Texas. And that was the one school I applied to. And thankfully, I was accepted and we moved there.
Hook 'em. We lived there for 2 years. And it was definitely an adjustment getting used to 70 degree days in January. That was an adjustment from Boston. Yeah. So, Hannah, while at UT, I remember that you got involved with researchers that were focused on some work related to wearable sensors. Can you talk about that? Like wearable sensors, like Fitbits, right? And what exactly were you working on?
Yeah, so I always use Fitbit as the example because that's what people know. But these are sensors that collected data similar to Fitbit or your mobile phone. It collected accelerometer data, it could collect audio data, it could collect video data, and the researchers I was working with, they were using that data to help measure child development. Typically, child development in the past has been measured in laboratory studies. So it's like you bring the parent in, you bring the baby in, you observe them, you see how the parent interacts with their child, and then they go home and you base all of your research on this 1 hour when they were in the lab. But we know that people aren't themselves when they come into the lab. So working on using these sensors so we can collect this data while they're in the home, while the researchers aren't present, it could really, change what we know about infant development.
Was the hope to gain some understanding that could potentially identify conditions with the child earlier in life? Like, could the wearable sensors be used to determine potentially if a child had autism, for example?
Yeah, so there's definitely an area of research that's focusing on that. What my mentor was mostly focused on was parent-child interactions. So one thing we know is that the more a child and a parent talk to each other, the better their language development is. So using audio data to capture the number of words spoken to the child to see how that impacts outcomes later in life.
That's really cool, because I know, just thinking of like devices, Amazon has recently launched Halo, and Halo does have that where it'll actually pick up the tone of your voice.
Heard about that, and I heard there was a lot of backlash and people thought it was creepy, which is a huge problem in sensor research, is people thinking it's creepy, people being concerned with their privacy, and those are all valid concerns. But to me, it's interesting how these devices are just like plowing ahead without considering these concerns that actual people have with them.
Well, I assume the hope is that people will just learn to accept it, right? Like, we all know when we go on the internet now, it's like, I know Google knows more about me than I do. They know when I'm going to go to the bathroom next, right? They have it down to a science. And I think you you resist it until you get worn down, and then you just accept it. Now,
but is that the right thing to do?
Ethically, maybe not.
And these are things that there's a ton of people in my field who are concerned with these ethics, and there's no great solution, but it's definitely an important field for people to be studying.
Well, so when you were trying to recruit mothers, what was the reception like? Like, I would imagine they might feel judged in some way, like, oh, are they going to find out and tell me I'm a bad mother? Like, what was the general thought process?
Actually, the specific research I was doing with this lab was focused more on these issues. So I conducted a study to look at the barriers to participation. So why do people not want to participate in these types of studies? Mm-hmm. And privacy is a big issue, but the bigger issue is the logistics that goes along with using these sensors. You have to keep the sensors charged. You have to, wear them, and it can be uncomfortable. So a lot of problems that are surrounding it. And there's definitely a lot of people who don't even want to engage in a conversation about using sensors. They're just immediately put off from it.
Even though you might say, we might, by participating, we may be able to help identify issues that would help both you and your child in the long term.
So with research, most research doesn't actually help the participants. We're doing research to help other people and help future interventions. So even if I were to participate in a study, the results aren't necessarily going to help me. The results are going to inform future interventions, future ways to help people. So it's hard in all areas of research to get people to participate, because it's tough, because it's not going to help the actual individual. It's going to help future societies.
No, and that makes sense. And I guess I hadn't thought of it like that. I understand what you're saying. In this country, it's known as a very individualistic nation, right? We kind of focus on ourselves and our immediate family. And to your point, you kind of have to be a little altruistic and say, well, I'd participate in this survey knowing it's not going to directly benefit me. It might benefit the next generation. In your knowledge, have you seen participation rates for any type of survey that's like this, finding more participants in collectivist societies like in Asia?
Oh, that's a good question. I do not know, but I will do some research and get back to you.
We say that Asian countries are more collectivists. Are they willing to participate in surveys that don't directly benefit the individual more so than in the United States?
I would also kind of be curious, like how low our point of entry for value is. Like if you gave somebody like a $5 Amazon gift card, they'll be like, yeah, you know what? I guess I'll wear this device versus nothing at all. Like how low, or even if it's like K50. But that's something that kind of goes into, I'm sure, your study. So it was during this time that you were also going to a methadone clinic, right? And you were interviewing patients about applications that could help them beating their drug addiction. What was that like?
So that was a really cool experience for me. I was definitely lucky that I was able to get involved in many different types of research while I was at UT. The methadone clinics was definitely very different for me, something I had never seen. And I learned a lot from going there. I think the biggest thing I learned was how important it is to have rapport with participants that you're interviewing. Similar to, this podcast, you have to have a good connection with your guests to get a good flow of conversation going. And that's really something that can be tricky when you have a researcher and you have a participant. It can be hard to get that rapport and get that connection so that they'll be open and honest. I remember the professor I was working on this with, he had tattoos. And when we were in class, he deliberately covered his tattoos. And when we went to the methadone clinics, he displayed those tattoos. He didn't hide them because it was a way to kind of show that you could relate with them more. It was a way to show that, we're not some stuffed up researcher, we're real people. And so just being able to relate with the participants in order to build their trust, to get them to talk to you, especially when you're talking about something so sensitive like illegal drug use. It's even more important then. So I learned a lot from that. It was a really cool experience.
Fast forward a little bit. Now you're a PhD student at Northwestern. What's it like being a PhD student during COVID?
It's a good question. So being a PhD student is known for being kind of lonely. I'm working on research that nobody except my advisors kind of know about. So it can be lonely. It's hard to talk to people who fully understand what you're doing. And then on top of COVID, which is just also a lonely time, now I'm not even that my peers can't relate. I'm not even seeing my peers. So I think it's more lonely. There's less of a community. I'm super grateful that I had a year as a student before things went remote so I could get to know some friends, and two of them, we have a Zoom call weekly, and it's so nice to just be able to chat with people who are kind of in a similar situation. But it's still, no one really knows. I don't even know fully what I'm doing, so it can be hard to relate with people.
Well, and I certainly try to listen and understand, but you're so into the weeds and so deep into like a specialization of a specialization. And so it just goes way over my head. It's kind of like last week when Cortland was talking to me about his chemistry projects. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm going to shake my head and try to understand.
And that's all I ask. I appreciate every time you listen to me, even if you don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, I appreciate that. All right, so we are going to go to break. And when we come back, we're going to get a little bit more fun. We're going to talk to Hannah about the secrets of bubble tea. We're going to ask her what her favorite cities are that she's ever lived in. And then we're going to talk about this little thing known as when we got married and our future celebration of it. We'll do that when we come right back.
What's up, guys? This is Ruben. You may remember me as being the first ever guest on the Between Two Studs podcast. I'm here now to promote my podcast, Guys Who Cry. Me, along with my co-host Adam Cook, we talk about a wealth of topics ranging from men crying, something we all do, to, some lighter things. For example, our newest episode, Adam and I talk about our dating blunders and just weird date stories. So guys, if you would be so kind, head on over to Spotify, Anchor, Apple, iTunes, And hit that follow button. Talk to us. Our Instagram is at Guys Who Cry Official. That is Guys Who Cry Official. Check us out. We'd love to hear from you.
All right, welcome back to Between Three Studs, special edition with Hannah Stud. Hannah, we were just talking about some of the fun you've been working on, different projects, research that you've been working on. I want to change the topic a little bit. I want to go back in time a couple of years to when we were living in Austin, Texas together. And I remember you briefly worked at a restaurant making bubble tea.
I did for about 3 months.
And yes, but you knew how to do it, right? You left because you got a better option. Another career opportunity came along that made more sense because you were not going to be a professional bubble tea maker. But you learned a lot along the way, and I know you love bubble tea to this day. What's an industry secret about bubble tea? And more importantly, what's your go-to flavor of bubble tea?
All good questions and very timely because I believe later this week is National Bubble Tea Day. So we will have to get some bubble tea to celebrate. An industry secret. I feel like there's still a lot that I didn't know, but one thing I will say is that fresh boba is much better. It is gooier and it's slightly warm and it tastes so much better. So if you can go right when your local bubble tea shop opens, or if you can find out when they remake it partway through the day, that's when you should get the boba.
Wait, so I didn't even know that was something, like I just thought they got it out of a can or something. They just put it in. I don't even know what boba is exactly, but like, can you explain it? Like, are they like baking it? Like, are they making it fresh every morning? Like, is this like Dunkin' Donuts?
So I'm not exactly sure because it's the cooks in the back who did it, at least where I worked. But boba is made from tapioca flour and it's cooked and boiled and then soaked in a brown sugar syrup. That's what gives it the sweetness. And if you can get it when it's fresh from being boiled, that's when it tastes the best.
Wow. I had no idea. Did you know that, Ron?
Yeah, unfortunately. Like you know me, Alex. I've got stupid knowledge about different things, but I'm a big bubble tea fan, especially even when I was in Singapore. They had a lot there. But here's the thing that's going to scare all of our listeners. Boba tea right now, they're having a bit of a shortage because of some shipping issues with Asia. So it might cause the price of our favorite type of tea to go up, unfortunately. So get it now while you can, because there might be a slight shortage for a bit.
Yes. And Ron, what is your go-to bubble tea drink?
Oh man, I have to say I love like the taro milk with the boba. Like that is divine right there.
So one thing that I loved about working at a bubble tea place was I could mix my own concoctions.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I really like is the taro with some coconut.
Ooh.
I recommend that.
Next time I go, I need to like request that. We'll call it the Hannah special.
I love it.
All I know is every time Hannah and I go to a bubble tea place, I just say, honey, you know what I like. Just order that. And it's
Alex, he likes lychee green tea.
I always forget it for some reason. So I'm just like, you know what I like? I'll have that.
That shows true trust in your spouse.
When you know their bubble tea drink.
See, with Susan and I, the opposite. She's like, well, what's in that? I'm like, I don't know. And then she'll eventually try it. She's like, it tastes great. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I ordered it. But you don't know what's in it? No. But I'm sure it's good.
You know, I'm just thinking literally off the top of my head as I'm having an alcoholic beverage. Is there bubble tea with booze in it? Slash, do you think that would taste good?
I'm sure there is, and it would probably be good with the green or black tea based ones, but something about the milk base and the milk tea with alcohol.
Probably not. Unless it's like a White Russian or something. I could see that maybe being good, but that still seems very reachy.
Listen, I'm willing to try anything once.
Yeah. All right. As an adult, you've lived in 3 cities, Boston, Austin, and Chicago. Which of those cities, though, did you like the best?
It's a hard question. So there's one I can immediately eliminate. Ron, do you know which one that would be?
Ooh. Well, it can't be Chicago because you've got way too much personal family history there. And it's a really cool place that I know you're both very happy with.
Ron, I'll give you a big hint. it's one of the places you haven't visited us at.
Well, I haven't visited you anywhere because I'm a horrible brother-in-law. But no, let's get back to the point. So Boston, you were engaged there. So I'm going to guess Austin. Is Austin right?
That is correct. So that was my least favorite place to live. It was just hot, and we lived in the city. It was a lot of college students. I think it's a great town to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there again, at least not in the city of Austin.
Mm-hmm.
I really we did a lot of road trips to small towns, and that was definitely a benefit of living in Austin.
There's a lot of really cool, small Texan towns that, you would never in a million years go to because they're in the middle of nowhere unless you live in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely appreciated that opportunity. Boston, I loved. It was my first time living in a city, and I love how walkable it is. I have such great memories there. You said, we got engaged there. That's where I met my husband.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely great memories. But, I am loving Chicago. I think that has got to be my favorite. I love where I live. I love the people here. And it's only been 2 years, but so far, so good.
Well, you have a lot of family ties here. This is where your parents met.
It is where my parents met. They met when they were both students at the University of Chicago. They got married here. So definitely some good family ties. I do have family still here. So I've been coming to Chicago for a while. So it's definitely funny, full circle to now be living here.
When it comes to being a sports fan, right? And now that you're in Chicago, I got to know, I'm assuming you're a Cubby fan. You're not a White Sox fan, or are you?
So Alex prefers the White Sox over the Cubs.
Okay.
I have no preference. I think if I had to pick a baseball team, I would stick with the Red Sox just because I used to work right next door to Fenway Park. So I'd say my baseball team is still the Red Sox.
But now when it comes to football, and I know our listeners can't see this, spoiler alert, you're wearing a Buffalo Bills shirt, which is awesome, by the way. But I got to know, how exactly did Alex end up converting you into becoming a Bills fan? And what makes that fandom special to you?
Yeah, so my parents didn't watch football growing up. Minnesota football, kind of a big deal, not really a big deal. Moved to Pittsburgh, Steelers. Everyone loves the Steelers. I watch them occasionally. Never really got into it, but casual watcher of the Steelers. And then Alex and I found a Bills backer bar in Boston. And we started going there every Sunday to watch the Bills. And it's what got me to be a Bills fan was the people. The fans are so passionate about not just the team and the sport, but they're passionate about Buffalo. And what really hooked me was the shout song.
The Bills make me wanna shout.
The shout song. I love that song. I love the energy that is in the room when that song is playing. I love the celebration. It's the fans and that song that makes me a Bills fan.
And this is what I always tell people. When we go to a bar, Buffalo Bills bar, the natural question, and Ron, you know this, the natural question is, oh, where are you from? Because everyone who's there is from Western New York, right? It's a matter of where in Western New York that you're from. And I usually say, oh, I'm from Olean. My wife, she's originally from the Pittsburgh area, but I converted her. And they're always like, oh, I want to hear about that. And I always respond with the same. Hannah doesn't think it's funny, but I always say, well, you know what? One day I met this beautiful woman, and she was a fan of this team that had won 6 Super Bowls. And I said, why would you want to be a fan of the team that's won 6 Super Bowls? Come be a Bills fan. We're going to win one any day now. And here we are 5 years later. So.
And I frequently get mad at Alex for making me a Bills fan because it can be heartbreaking at times. I hate to admit this, but I have cried watching some Bills games. It is not an easy life. So sometimes I get mad at him for putting me through this.
So I'd like to follow up with that, just because now that you've also lived in 3 different cities and you've gone to assuredly 3 different Bills bars in those different cities, what's maybe a commonality that you've seen with Bills fans across the country?
Friendly. and proud of Western New York. You know, we have met some good friends at all 3 bars, and everyone is just friendly. You know, you get started talking. If you're in this bar at this time, it means you must be a Bills fan. It must mean that you're a good person, so I'm going to be your friend. So it's nice to know that there's a place where you can go when you've just moved to a new city, a place where you can go where you'll be welcomed immediately.
Yeah.
I think what was special for Hannah and I too is during everything that's going on in the world, politics and the economy and the environment, for 3 hours go into this football game with strangers, and you have no idea. The person next to you might be totally different from you, politically, ideologically, every way. But for 3 hours, you're best friends and you're having a good time. And there is something to be said about that. I think sometimes we need to think about the commonalities that we have with one another. And those differences, yes, they're important, but really at the end of the day, the most important things are looking and caring for one another. And I think that is exemplified on a Sunday afternoon at a Bills bar anywhere in the country.
Especially going on that commonalities thread, you've met people that have known, like Olean, they've known me, they've known others. That's pretty crazy too.
I've met people who are like, oh, I know the Studs. I know your brother Ron. I went to high school with him. Or oh yeah, Olean. I lived in Olean. Vic Vina's. Yeah, I got to go to the pharmacy. You know, like, and I'm like, yeah, like
that's just crazy.
And here, like, I'm in a random bar not random, but it's a Bills bar in Austin, Texas. Yet everyone in that bar knows Olean, New York, and probably knows someone who knows somebody we all know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how many times I've been like, I say Olean, they're like, oh, Beef and Barrel, love that place. I'm like, yeah, we got that.
Yep.
And we've been to Bills bars, not just in the cities that we've lived. When we're traveling, we'll also go to the Bills bar. Like, we've been in Dallas, we've been Houston, Philly.
Yeah, it's true. If we travel in the fall, which before COVID we were doing a lot, we would plan our flight schedule. Like, all right, we got to go home Sunday, but the game's at 1:00. Let's get like a 7 p.m. flight so we can find a Bills bar, watch the game, and then fly home.
And I got to say, I give you credit for that, Alex, because I was not really up on where all the Bills bars were. You introduced me to that. And then the other thing I was going to say is, every time I've gone traveling with you in the fall, like we were in London and you found a Bills bar in London, which was awesome. We found a Bills bar in Palm Desert. Fortunately, COVID hit and it was kind of crazy, but we still found a bar to watch the game, which was important.
We sure did. Yeah, I think it's kind of cool. I mean, we talked about this on our previous episode, but a lot of people who were from Western New York kind of left because they had to, right? There weren't any more job opportunities in Western New York. So they left, but there's still that, like, I'm proud to be from there. And that's reflected in the fandom of the Bills, because that's the one time where the country is talking about the city of Buffalo, right? There's not really any other reason to talk about the city of Buffalo except, oh yeah, they are one of only 32 NFL franchises, right? There's only 30 cities with an NFL franchise because LA and New York both have 2. So, all right. So we know now why Hannah is a diehard Buffalo Bills fan. I want to talk, maybe Ron should be asking this question because it's a little too close to home for me, but we obviously got engaged, honey, and planned a wedding in 2019, right? We were planning a wedding for 2020. We had it all planned out, picked out everything from the colors to the venue to everything, right? And then a pandemic showed up. What was that like for you? And what was it like rescheduling that twice?
A pain in the ass. It has not been so fun. Wedding planning, I think, in normal times can be tricky and hard. And then adding in this pandemic when things are so uncertain and things are changing all the time, it's been hard. And I'm frankly just sick of wedding planning at this point. I feel like I've planned like 3 separate weddings just because, we've changed the date, we've changed the venue, a lot of different changes. That means a lot of different things that have to plan. So it hasn't been the easiest. I think what kind of makes it easier to handle, it puts less pressure on it, is the fact that Alex and I are legally married. We went to the courthouse back in September. We got legally married. And that almost just like takes the pressure off of the actual day. It makes it feel more casual, more laid back. And so we've changed the venue to kind of reflect that. We've made some other changes to try and make it more laid back. Originally it was going to be, this grand ballroom, and now it's an outdoor venue. So our priorities have changed. And I think going through a pandemic, I would think that it changes most people's priorities. So it's been hard. It hasn't been fun. And I think part of it is, growing up, you think it's going to be fun. And when it's not, it can be disappointing.
Yeah. Well, then especially get pushed back, to have to kind of reframe it in your head, how it has to be done. All of that, I'm sure, is exhausting. But I know I'm really excited to actually go in July. And I'm also really excited that both you and Alex are married back in September of this past year, because Alex called me about that and I was like, that is awesome. We actually need some good news for 2020 because it was such a horrible year. And I'm like, that it actually makes that year not so bad. I think it's possibly redeemed by that one act. So I was very happy about that.
Thanks. And we're obviously so excited to see our friends and family, and we're excited to have a fun day. But leading up to it has been kind of hard. I don't know, Alex, what are your thoughts?
I think you summed it up really well. I think at the end of the day, when we were planning this in 2019, we weren't thinking about the wellness and safety of our guests, right? That was like an assumed thing. And so all of a sudden, when you're having to think about those type of logistics that you weren't planning for. And so you said it, right? We had to completely change our expectations and change what we were most focused on. And the number one focus became the safety and well-being of everybody. And that's why we ended up pushing our wedding back almost a full year, as well as moving the venue outdoors. So it is what it is. Can't say we were thrilled by it, but all things considered, nothing in life is guaranteed, and we took it with stride. And yes, we are excited to celebrate with everybody come July.
Yeah, I think COVID has definitely changed priorities for most people. But, one positive outcome is it gave you guys the time to do this podcast.
That's true. That's true. Wikipedia will someday say positive outcomes. It'll be the positive outcomes of COVID section. It'll say between two studs got launched.
You think very highly of yourself.
Yes. Let's kind of talk about Between Two Studs, actually. Hannah, you've been a big part of Between Two Studs since the get-go. Even though most people might not realize it, you've done a lot of the work behind the scenes. You've done all of the artwork for the podcast, including the logo. What's that been like? What's your thought process? And where do we go from here?
Yeah, so I'm very honored that you guys asked me to help you out. I've been making the Instagram posts. I use canva.com. Shout out to Canva. It's been very easy. Definitely recommend it if you ever have something quick you have to draft up. But one thing that was interesting when I was creating, I used the same layout for every guest, just change the episode number, change the title, change the picture. But it was fun trying to think of a layout and a design and a font that fits you too. Like, what fits your personality? A lot of the templates that Canva has just felt too feminine and too upbeat. I don't know if that's the right word, but you guys are more inquisitive, more thoughtful. And so trying to find, a font and a layout and a logo that kind of fits that mood and style.
I don't know about you, Alex, but I think the one thing I've heard from all of our guests is they love the way that you showcase them all in such a positive light. I've shown people our Instagram page and they're just like, wow, look at all that art. Look at all those people. And it's you really have had a lot of people on your show, really different people, pull them together in such a uniform and beautiful way that it makes it a cool thing, I think, as a guest member of the audience to kind of see yourselves in lights, on our Instagram page.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that the pictures, we have the guests send us several different pictures and we pick, one that we think will work best. And I think it's really cool how the pictures are unique and represent the individual guest. And then, it's put out into this uniform layout that kind of represents the podcast. So I think it's a really good balance between representing your guest and their individuality, but also representing the podcast and who you guys are.
Can you quickly explain the workflow? Like what happens all of a sudden is Ron and we come to you and say, all right, we have an episode coming out this Tuesday. What happens and how do you get involved?
Yeah, so what I do is I take an existing post and I just copy it. So it's the same positioning of the text and the logo, and then I add in the new picture. I remove the background from the picture. And so what takes me the longest, now that I have kind of this template I'm working with, the color. Mm-hmm. Picking the color is what takes the longest. And I like to give the guest a couple different options so that they can pick what they like. But thinking about what color looks good, thinking about what color looks good on Instagram, if you're looking at all of the posts on Between Two Studs, looking at how those colors look together. If we have blue background, we don't want the very next one to be with a blue background. So thinking of changing that up a little bit. And then we send it off to the guests. You guys handle that and you let them pick. And then Alex posts it on Instagram and Ron posts it on Spotify.
And now on YouTube.
So you asked me earlier what I think the next step is. And I think having a YouTube channel could be cool. I think that's a lot of work, maybe for season 2, but I think a YouTube channel with video could be very interesting.
So you're saying future episodes with potentially the video provided as well?
I am not doing the video editing, so that is all on you. But I think that would be a very cool next step.
We need to find like an intern somewhere who's got nothing better to do that would love getting paid in almost nothing. If you're interested,
if you're an intern interested in getting paid nothing,
yeah,
and with the name recognition of Between Two Studs, which is not significant, contact us.
Yeah, your name's going to go first thing in the credits.
Between@twostuds.com.
All right, Hannah. Last question of the night. Last episode, we talked with Cortland, and we were kind of learning a little bit about when you guys first started dating. And I have to imagine now that you're really locked in with Alex, you're locked in with COVID. What's something that is really surprising that you've learned about Alex having lived with him now?
Very good question. I think the biggest surprise when we first started living together was how frequently he needs some alone time. Alex is this very extroverted, talkative, outgoing person most of the time, but sometimes he needs to chill by himself and play video games. And I wasn't expecting that. I hadn't seen that side of him. I didn't see that until we started living together. So little lesser known fact about Alex is sometimes he's a little introverted. And that was something I had to get used to.
Well, it's funny. We actually talked about this on a previous episode with Candace Bird.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in high school and college, you take a lot of those personality exams. And one of the things that I learned about between extroverted people and introverted people is it's less about comfort level and it's more about what reinvigorates them, what energizes them. And a true extrovert gets energized by having those discussions. And what I realize is that doesn't actually energize me. I enjoy those discussions when I'm out and being the center of attention in a big party, whatever, right? I love those. But I come back and I'm exhausted. At the end of the day, I'm exhausted. And I usually need some me time, as I call it, the next day. And I think that's something that you very quickly picked up on. And I think when we first moved in together, I think there were a couple times where you may not have said it out loud, but I think you were almost a little concerned, like, well, are you upset? Is there something wrong? And it's like, no, I just need me time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, how would I have learned that until we moved in together? So I am a huge proponent on living with someone before you get married because it's a lot of work and you can learn a lot about someone. And so getting through that before getting married can be nice. It can make your first year of marriage a lot smoother if you've already gotten over those bumps of first living with someone.
Very true, and very good words of wisdom. And with that, I think we're going to wrap this wonderful, delightful episode of Between Three Studs, episode 20. Thank you so much, Hannah.
It's between two studs, but then it's like two pieces of bread, but the inside of the bread is another bread piece.
Yeah, it's like a triple-decker, stud. Yeah.
A lot of carbs here.
But Hannah, you've been a huge part of getting us through these first 20 episodes, so thank you so much.
You've already planned out our season finale, basically.
Yes, which is awesome.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be part of this.
Awesome. Well, I have to say it because I do every episode. We'll have to have you back in the future. Thank you again.